Rachel Harper had always prided herself on being a strong woman. At 42, she was a stunning embodiment of elegance, with piercing blue eyes that could freeze a room and a reserved demeanor that commanded respect. As the head dentist at her own thriving clinic, which her husband, Ethan, had financed, she had built a life most people envied. Their sprawling estate boasted a pool, a guesthouse, and a home office for Ethan, a successful investment banker. They had 2 children, Maddie, a spirited 15-year-old, and Jake, a 19-year-old college freshman who was just starting to find his footing as an independent adult. Ethan, with his movie star looks and easy charm, had always been the life of the party. When they first met, Rachel had been the one to ignite a fire in him, her wit and beauty leaving him spellbound. But over the years, life had shifted. The demands of their careers and the constant juggling act of raising children had taken its toll. Somewhere along the way, Rachel had traded her sparkle for practicality, swapping spontaneous date nights for carefully scheduled family dinners. Ethan, once her biggest admirer, now seemed to look past her as if she had faded into the wallpaper. She noticed the first signs of trouble subtly. Ethan, who had always been attentive, began coming home later than usual. His explanations were plausible, last-minute meetings, client dinners, but there was an underlying shift. He had started spending an inordinate amount of time with Zoe, their nanny, a vivacious 26-year-old with sun-kissed hair and an infectious laugh. Rachel had hired Zoe 3 years ago, initially impressed by her enthusiasm and warmth with the kids. But lately, Zoe seemed more interested in Ethan than in Maddie or Jake. Rachel had brushed it off as paranoia. After all, Ethan loved her, didn't he? He had built her clinic, stood by her during sleepless nights with sick kids, and celebrated every milestone in her career. Why would he jeopardize all of that? Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her suspicions grew when she noticed the lingering glances between Ethan and Zoe. It was in the small moments, a too long touch on the shoulder, a shared laugh over an inside joke Rachel wasn't privy to. But Rachel was nothing if not rational. She dismissed these as coincidences, unwilling to believe her husband could betray her. Until one fateful evening, when her world came crashing down. Rachel stood paralyzed in the doorway, her breath caught in her chest. It was as if time had slowed, every detail searing into her mind, the way Ethan's hands were wrapped tightly around Zoe's waist, the soft moan that escaped Zoe's lips, and the look of utter passion in Ethan's eyes. A look Rachel hadn't seen directed at her in years. The forgotten phone slipped from her hand, crashing onto the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter. The sound startled them apart like guilty teenagers caught sneaking out after curfew. Ethan's face drained of color as his eyes met Rachel's, while Zoe quickly adjusted her blouse, her face flushed with embarrassment, or maybe defiance. "Rachel, Ethan began, stepping toward her, but Rachel held up a trembling hand to stop him. "Don't," she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Don't you dare say another word." Zoe mumbled something incoherent before bolting out of the room, leaving Rachel and Ethan alone in the suffocating silence. Rachel turned to leave, but Ethan grabbed her arm. "Wait, please. Let me explain," he pleaded, his voice thick with desperation. Rachel yanked her arm free, her eyes blazing. "Explain? Explain what, Ethan? That you've been screwing the nanny while I've been busy holding our entire family together?" "It's not like that," he stammered, running a hand through his hair. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to." "Spare me," Rachel snapped, cutting him off. "Do you think I'm stupid? That I wouldn't notice the way you two looked at each other? I gave you the benefit of the doubt because I trusted you, Ethan. God help me, I trusted you." Her voice cracked on the last word, and tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to spill down her cheeks. She turned and walked away, ignoring Ethan's calls as she made her way to their bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Rachel locked the bedroom door behind her, leaning against it as if bracing herself for the weight of the betrayal. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, and her chest felt tight, like it was caving in. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob, but the sound escaped anyway, a raw, guttural cry that echoed in the quiet room. She glanced around the space that had been her sanctuary for so many years. The plush king-sized bed with its perfectly arranged pillows, the framed wedding photo on the dresser, the vase of fresh roses Ethan had brought her just a week ago, everything now felt like a cruel mockery. How could he? The question hammered in her mind, over and over again. She thought about their life together, the milestones they had celebrated, the nights they had stayed up talking about their dreams, the children they had raised together. Every memory now felt tainted, overshadowed by what she had just witnessed. The knock on the door startled her. "Rachel," Ethan called from the other side, his voice muffled but insistent. "Please, open the door. We need to talk." She didn't respond. She couldn't. The mere thought of facing him made her stomach churn. "Rachel, please," he begged. "I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but we need to figure this out. We owe it to the kids." At the mention of Maddie and Jake, a fresh wave of pain washed over her. The kids. How would this affect them? Maddie was still so impressionable, and Jake, though older, idolized his father. What would they think if they knew the truth? Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts again. "I'll wait out here all night if I have to. Just, let me explain." With a deep breath, Rachel wiped her tears and opened the door. Ethan stood there, looking disheveled and remorseful, his usually confident demeanor replaced by an almost pathetic vulnerability. "You want to explain?" she said, her voice icy and controlled, though her hands trembled at her sides. "Fine. Start talking." Ethan hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "It wasn't planned," he began. "I don't know how it started. Zoe and we just—" "Stop," Rachel cut him off. "Don't you dare stand there and insult me with clichés. You didn't fall into her arms, Ethan. You made a choice. Over and over again." He looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "You're right. I did. And I hate myself for it." Rachel laughed bitterly. "Do you? Because it didn't seem like it back there. You looked pretty damn comfortable with her." Ethan flinched. "I never wanted to hurt you, Rachel. I swear." "Then why did you?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Was it because I'm not exciting enough for you anymore? Because I'm too busy running the clinic and raising our kids to cater to your ego?" "No," he said quickly. "It's not about you. It's about me. I've been feeling lost. Like I'm not good enough, like I'm not seen anymore." Rachel stared at him in disbelief. "So, instead of talking to me about it, you decided to screw the nanny? How noble of you." He looked away, his face a mask of shame. "I don't have an excuse," he admitted. "I was selfish. I let my insecurities get the better of me." Rachel's heart twisted painfully. Part of her wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope that their marriage could somehow survive this. But another part of her, the part that had watched her husband kiss another woman in their home, knew that things would never be the same. "I need space," she said finally. "You need to leave. Tonight." Ethan's eyes widened. "Rachel, please. Let's not make any rash decisions." "Rash?" she echoed, her voice trembling with anger. "You've been sleeping with Zoe for God knows how long, and you have the audacity to call my decision rash." He opened his mouth to argue but closed it again, seemingly realizing he had no ground to stand on. "Where will I go?" he asked quietly. "I don't care," Rachel said, her tone cold. "Get a hotel. Stay with a friend. Hell, go to Zoe's apartment for all I care. Just get out of my sight." Ethan hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Okay. I'll go. But this isn't over, Rachel." We can fix this. She didn't respond, closing the door in his face. The moment she was alone again, she sank onto the bed, her body racked with sobs. She didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the realization that the man she had built her life with had become a stranger. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the silent house, followed by the hum of Ethan's car engine as it disappeared down the long driveway. Rachel sat motionless on the bed, her mind a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, sorrow, all competing for dominance. She felt like a stranger in her own life, like everything she had known and built was crumbling beneath her feet. She couldn't sit still any longer. Rising to her feet, she began to pace, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. She wanted to scream, to cry, to break something, anything to release the pent-up emotion threatening to consume her. But a soft knock at the door startled her out of her thoughts. "Mom." Maddie's voice came through, tentative and laced with concern. Rachel froze, her heart sinking. She had hoped her daughter had slept through the chaos, but of course, Maddie was too perceptive for that. Rachel wiped her face quickly and opened the door, forcing a weak smile. "Hey, sweetheart. What are you doing up?" Maddie stood there in her oversized hoodie and pajama pants, her eyes wide and worried. "I heard yelling," she said softly. "And Dad just left." "What's going on?" Rachel's stomach twisted. How could she explain something so painful and complicated to her 15-year-old daughter? She wanted to protect Maddie from the ugly truth, but lying felt equally wrong. She stepped aside, motioning for Maddie to come in. "Let's sit down," Rachel said, guiding Maddie to the bed. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "Your dad and I had a fight. A big one. He's staying somewhere else tonight so we can have some space." Maddie frowned. "What kind of fight? Is it serious? Are you guys?" She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Are you getting a divorce?" The word hit Rachel like a punch to the gut. Divorce. She hadn't even had time to consider the possibility, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel frighteningly real. She reached for Maddie's hand, squeezing it gently. "I don't know what's going to happen yet," Rachel admitted. "But I want you to know that no matter what, your dad and I love you and Jake more than anything. This isn't your fault, okay?" Maddie nodded slowly, but her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want you to split up," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't want our family to fall apart." Rachel pulled her into a hug, stroking her hair as Maddie cried softly against her shoulder. "I know, sweetie," she murmured. "I know." As she held her daughter, Rachel's resolve hardened. She couldn't let her emotions spiral out of control. She needed to think clearly, to figure out what was best for her children, and for herself. When Maddie finally calmed down and went back to her room, Rachel sat alone in the dimly lit bedroom, staring at the wedding photo on the dresser. Her mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Was it just Zoe, or had there been others? Was there even a way to salvage their marriage, or was it too far gone? One thing was clear, she needed answers. And she wasn't going to get them by sitting in the dark and crying. Pulling on a robe, she grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Zoe's number. Her finger hovered over the call button for a moment before she pressed it. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. "Hello." Zoe's voice was cautious, unsure. "It's Rachel," she said, her voice sharp and direct. "We need to talk. Now." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a nervous exhale. I don't think that's a good idea." "I don't care what you think," Rachel snapped. "You've been sleeping with my husband. The least you can do is face me and explain yourself." Zoe hesitated, then said quietly, "Okay. I'll come over." "No," Rachel said firmly. "Meet me at your apartment. I'm on my way." She ended the call before Zoe could argue, grabbing her car keys and heading for the door. She didn't know what she hoped to accomplish by confronting Zoe, but she knew she couldn't let this betrayal fester in silence. She needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The drive to Zoe's apartment felt like a blur. Rachel's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as her mind replayed the image of Ethan and Zoe together in his office. The memory burned in her chest, a constant reminder of the betrayal she couldn't escape. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from Ethan. "Ethan, Rachel, please don't do anything drastic. We can work this out." She ignored it, shoving the phone back into her bag. Work this out. The nerve of him to ask for that after what he had done. She focused on the road ahead, her destination looming closer. When she pulled up to Zoe's building, a modest complex that paled in comparison to the luxury of the Harper estate, she killed the engine and sat there for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stairs to Zoe's unit. She knocked sharply, her breath shallow. A few seconds later, the door opened, revealing Zoe in leggings and an oversized sweatshirt, her usually bubbly demeanor replaced with unease. "Come in," Zoe said quietly, stepping aside. Rachel entered, taking in the sparse but tidy apartment. It was a stark contrast to the opulence she was used to, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered how Ethan had justified trading their shared life for this. But her anger flared again as she reminded herself that Zoe wasn't just some victim in this situation. She had played an active role in the betrayal. Zoe closed the door and stood awkwardly by the couch, avoiding Rachel's piercing gaze. "I know you're angry," Zoe started, her voice trembling slightly. "And I don't blame you." "Good," Rachel said coldly. "You shouldn't. Now start talking. How long has this been going on?" Zoe hesitated, then sighed. "About 6 months," she admitted. "It started, after that fundraiser dinner. Do you remember? I was babysitting Maddie, and when you came home, you and Ethan had been fighting." Rachel's stomach twisted. She did remember. That night, she and Ethan had argued over something trivial, she couldn't even recall what. She had gone to bed angry, while Ethan had stayed in his office. Apparently, that had been the night he crossed a line. 6 months, Rachel repeated, her voice flat. "You've been sleeping with my husband for half a year. In my house. Around my children." Zoe flinched but didn't deny it. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Rachel. I swear. Ethan he was so lonely. He told me he felt like you didn't see him anymore." Rachel laughed bitterly. "Oh, so this is my fault now? Is that what he told you?" "No." Zoe said quickly, her eyes wide. "That's not what I meant. I don't know how it happened. One night, he opened up to me about how he felt, and she broke off, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake. A huge mistake." Rachel crossed her arms, unmoved by Zoe's tears. "Did you ever think about me? About Maddie and Jake? Or was it just about you and your feelings?" Zoe shook her head, her voice breaking. "I did think about you. I felt terrible every time. But Ethan made me feel like I mattered. And I let myself believe it was okay because he said your marriage was falling apart." Rachel's anger flared hotter. "So that gave you permission to play the savior? To insert yourself into my life and destroy my family?" "I didn't mean to destroy anything." Zoe cried. "I know what I did was wrong. And if I could take it back, I would. I'm so sorry, Rachel." The apology hung in the air, but Rachel couldn't bring herself to accept it. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Why now?" Rachel asked, her voice quieter but no less intense. "Why did you let this happen for 6 months? What was the plan? Did you think he was going to leave me for you?" Zoe shook her head vehemently. No. He never said that. He said he loved you and the kids. He just didn't know how to fix things with you. Rachel stared at her, disbelief written all over her face. Love me? If Ethan had loved her, he wouldn't have turned to Zoe. He wouldn't have shattered their marriage. As she processed Zoe's words, something else dawned on her. Do you know why Ethan didn't want me to come here tonight? Zoe looked confused. What do you mean? Rachel's voice was cold and steady. I mean, is there something here he doesn't want me to find? Zoe paled. No. I don't know what you're talking about. But Rachel wasn't convinced. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on a stack of papers on the counter. She moved toward them before Zoe could stop her, sifting through receipts and documents until her hand froze. In her grasp was a hotel receipt for a weekend Ethan had supposedly been on a business trip. Her blood ran cold. This was 3 months ago, she said, her voice trembling with fury. You were with him in Miami? Zoe opened her mouth, but no sound came out. You weren't just a fling, Rachel realized, her voice rising. This was an affair. You weren't just the nanny, he was building a second life with you. The color drained from Zoe's face as she stammered, Rachel, I. Save it, Rachel snapped, throwing the papers back on the counter. I've heard enough. She stormed toward the door, her heart pounding. But as she reached for the handle, Zoe's voice stopped her. Wait, Zoe said, her voice desperate. There's something else you need to know. Rachel turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. What now? Zoe hesitated, then dropped the bombshell, I'm pregnant. Rachel stood frozen at the door, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. Pregnant. The word echoed in her head, louder and louder, drowning out every other thought. She turned back to Zoe, who stood trembling, her hands clasped together like a child awaiting punishment. Say that again, Rachel said, her voice low, trembling with rage and disbelief. I'm pregnant, Zoe repeated, her eyes filling with tears. I found out last week. I was going to tell Ethan, but You thought, when would be a good time? Rachel interrupted, her voice sharp and venomous. After you destroyed my marriage? After my children found out their nanny is carrying their father's child? Or maybe you were waiting for the next family dinner to drop that little gem? Zoe shrank back, her tears now flowing freely. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said weakly, as if that excused anything. You didn't mean for it to happen. Rachel repeated, her voice rising. You didn't mean to sleep with a married man. Didn't mean to betray the woman who trusted you with her home, her children, her life. Zoe sobbed into her hands, but Rachel couldn't find a shred of sympathy. Her anger was a storm, fierce and unrelenting. She had come here seeking answers, but what she had found was so much worse. She grabbed her bag and turned for the door again, her hands trembling as she opened it. Do not contact me. Do not contact my children. And if you think for 1 second I'll let you drag my family through the mud to justify your mistakes, you're sorely mistaken. Before Zoe could respond, Rachel walked out, slamming the door behind her. She didn't wait for the elevator, taking the stairs 2 at a time, desperate to escape the suffocating air of that apartment. When she reached her car, she sat in the driver's seat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as her chest heaved. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. The drive home was a blur, her mind replaying Zoe's confession over and over. Pregnant. The word felt like a dagger twisting in her gut. This wasn't just an affair anymore, it was a betrayal with consequences that would ripple through their lives forever. When Rachel pulled into the driveway, the house loomed before her, dark and quiet. She stepped inside and locked the door behind her, leaning against it as exhaustion washed over her. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m. The kids were asleep, blissfully unaware of the chaos unraveling in their family. She tiptoed up the stairs and peeked into Maddie's room. Her daughter was curled up under a pile of blankets, her face peaceful in sleep. Rachel's heart ached as she watched her, knowing how much pain lay ahead. How could she protect her children from the fallout of Ethan's choices? How could she shield them from the ugliness that now defined their family? Rachel barely slept that night. When morning came, she found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Ethan, I'm coming over. We need to talk." Her jaw clenched. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was the last person she wanted to see. But she also knew she couldn't avoid him forever. There were too many unanswered questions, too many decisions to make. When the doorbell rang an hour later, Rachel took a deep breath and opened it. Ethan stood on the porch, looking haggard and unshaven. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes searching her face. "Rachel." "Don't," she said sharply, holding up a hand. "Sit down. We're going to talk, but this isn't going to be a conversation you control." Ethan hesitated, then obeyed, sitting at the kitchen table. Rachel stayed standing, looming over him like a judge ready to deliver a verdict. "I went to see Zoe," she began, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Ethan's eyes widened. You did?" "Yes," she said, crossing her arms. "And she told me everything." 6 months, Ethan. 6 months of lying, sneaking around, and throwing away everything we built together. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, she drops another bombshell. Ethan's face paled. What do you mean?" "She's pregnant," Rachel said, her voice breaking on the word. Ethan's jaw dropped, and he slumped back in his chair, his face a mixture of shock and horror. "What? That's not possible. She never told you." Rachel interrupted, her laugh bitter. "Well, congratulations. You're going to be a father again. I hope it was worth it, Ethan. I hope she was worth it." Ethan buried his face in his hands, groaning. "Oh my God. Rachel, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know." "I don't care what you knew or didn't know," Rachel snapped. "The damage is done. The question now is, what the hell are we going to do about it?" Ethan looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I want to fix this, Rachel. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, don't give up on us." She stared at him, her heart torn between anger and the faintest sliver of hope. But before she could respond, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Maddie stood in the doorway, her face pale and confused. "Fix what?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" Rachel's heart dropped as she turned to face Maddie. Her daughter stood in the doorway, her oversized hoodie hanging off her small frame, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Maddie glanced between her parents, clearly sensing the tension that filled the kitchen like a heavy fog. "Maddie," Rachel said softly, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "You shouldn't have to hear this right now." Maddie frowned, stepping further into the room. "Why not? Something's obviously wrong. Dad's been gone all night, you've been upset, and now you're both here talking about fixing things. What's going on?" Rachel hesitated, her mind racing. She had wanted to shield Maddie from this for as long as possible, but Maddie was perceptive, too perceptive to be placated with half-truths. "Maddie," Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly as he tried to speak, "this is complicated. Your mom and I are going through a tough time right now." "Tough time?" Maddie repeated, narrowing her eyes. "What does that mean? Are you getting a divorce?" Rachel flinched at the word, and Ethan winced, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The silence stretched unbearably long before Rachel finally spoke. "Your dad made a mistake," Rachel said carefully, her voice steady but firm. "A very big mistake. And we're trying to figure out what this means for our family." Maddie stared at them, her expression shifting from confusion to something darker, anger. "What kind of mistake?" she demanded, her voice rising. "What did he do?" Ethan looked down, unable to meet Maddie's gaze, and Rachel felt the weight of the moment crushing her. Maddie deserved the truth, but how could she possibly explain the magnitude of Ethan's betrayal without destroying her daughter's perception of him forever? Rachel took a deep breath, deciding to give Maddie only as much as she could handle for now. "Your dad has been seeing someone else," she said quietly. "He broke our trust." The words hit Maddie like a physical blow. She stumbled back, her face crumpling in disbelief. "What? No. No, that's not true. Dad wouldn't do that." "Maddie," Ethan started, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't!" Maddie shouted, her voice shaking. "Don't try to explain. How could you do this to us? To Mom?" Ethan stood, reaching toward her, but Maddie took another step back, her eyes blazing with tears. "Don't touch me," she cried. "I hate you." "Maddie, please," Ethan begged, his voice breaking. "I made a mistake, but I love you and your brother. That hasn't changed." "Hasn't changed?" Maddie laughed bitterly. "Everything's changed. You ruined everything, Dad. How are we supposed to trust you after this?" Rachel stepped forward, placing a hand on Maddie's shoulder. "Maddie, I know this is a lot to take in, and I'm so sorry you're finding out like this. But I promise you, we'll get through this. Together." Maddie shook her head, pulling away from Rachel's touch. "Together? How? He's the one who broke us." With that, Maddie turned and ran upstairs, slamming her bedroom door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, leaving Rachel and Ethan standing in the kitchen, the air between them heavy with unresolved pain. Rachel sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "This is exactly what I wanted to avoid," she said, her voice muffled. "I didn't want her to find out like this." Ethan sat across from her, his face etched with guilt. "I'll talk to her," he said softly. "No, you won't," Rachel snapped, lifting her head. "You've done enough damage. You don't get to waltz in and play the hero now." Ethan flinched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Rachel, I know I've ruined everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, not right away, maybe not ever. But I need you to know that I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. For you, for the kids." Rachel stared at him, her emotions a tangled mess. Part of her wanted to believe him, to hold on to the man she had loved for so many years. But another part of her, the part still reeling from Zoe's revelation, knew that trust was a fragile thing, and Ethan had shattered it beyond recognition. "I don't even know where to start," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do I rebuild something that feels so broken?" "We'll figure it out," Ethan said, his eyes pleading. "Please, Rachel. Don't give up on us." Rachel didn't respond. Instead, she stood and walked toward the stairs, her mind racing. She needed time to think, to process, to decide what her next move would be. And most of all, she needed to protect Maddie and Jake from the fallout of Ethan's choices. Rachel climbed the stairs slowly, her mind weighed down by Maddie's heartbreak and Ethan's empty promises. She reached her bedroom, closing the door behind her to escape the storm brewing downstairs. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she exhaled deeply, as though trying to push the pain out of her chest. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the sharp sound breaking through the silence. She glanced at the screen, expecting another desperate message from Ethan. Instead, it was an unknown number. Hesitating for a moment, she answered, her voice cautious. "Hello. Rachel, it's Zoe." Rachel's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" she asked sharply, her exhaustion bleeding into her tone. "I'm sorry to call, but this couldn't wait," Zoe said quickly. "I know you don't believe me," and you probably hate me, but I swear I didn't mean for things to get this far. I wanted to tell you something Ethan doesn't know. Rachel felt a chill run through her. If this is about the pregnancy, I already know. It's not just that, Zoe said, her voice trembling. I went to see the doctor yesterday. Rachel, there's a chance the baby might not be Ethan's. For a moment, Rachel thought she had misheard. What? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's complicated, Zoe admitted. Before Ethan and I started, whatever this was, I was seeing someone else. It was casual, but the timing lines up. I haven't told Ethan because I'm not sure yet. I didn't want to make things worse. Rachel's head spun, the weight of Zoe's words crashing over her like a tidal wave. She wanted to scream at Zoe, to tell her that she had already made things worse. But a tiny spark of relief flickered within her. If the baby wasn't Ethan's, maybe there was a way to salvage what was left of her family. And you waited until now to tell me this? Rachel asked, her voice cold. You've been carrying on with my husband for months, and now you decide to confess that this child might not even be his? I didn't know how to tell you, Zoe said, her voice breaking. I was scared. And I know nothing I say will make this right, but I needed to be honest with you. Rachel closed her eyes, her free hand pressing against her temple. Honest? Now you want to be honest? After lying to me, betraying me, and breaking up my family? I'm sorry, Zoe whispered, but Rachel couldn't find any sympathy in her heart. I don't want to hear from you again, Rachel said firmly. Sort out your mess, Zoe. But leave me, my husband, and my children out of it. Before Zoe could respond, Rachel ended the call and threw the phone onto the bed. She buried her face in her hands, her mind racing. If Zoe's revelation was true, it changed everything. But how could she even begin to untangle the mess Ethan had created? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. Rachel, he said quietly. Can I come in? She wanted to tell him no, to shut him out completely. But instead, she nodded, motioning for him to sit in the armchair by the window. He obeyed, looking at her like a man awaiting judgment. I just got off the phone with Zoe, Rachel said, her voice calm but icy. Ethan's eyes widened. She called you? What did she say? She told me there's a chance the baby might not be yours, Rachel said bluntly, watching his reaction carefully. Ethan's mouth fell open, and he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. What? Are you serious? Rachel nodded. She said she was seeing someone else before you. She doesn't know for sure who the father is. Ethan rubbed his face with his hands, groaning. Oh my God. I don't even know what to say. Don't bother, Rachel said sharply. I don't care how you feel about this, Ethan. You made your choices, and now you get to deal with the consequences. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. Rachel, I never wanted any of this to happen. I love you. I love our family. I was an idiot, an absolute idiot, and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a chance to make this right. Rachel stared at him, her heart torn. Part of her wanted to scream at him to leave and never come back. But another part of her, the part that remembered the man she had loved, the father of her children, hesitated. I don't know if I can forgive you, she admitted, her voice breaking. You've broken something in me, Ethan. Something I'm not sure can be fixed. I'll do whatever it takes, Ethan said desperately. Therapy, counseling, moving out if you need space. Anything, Rachel. Just please, don't give up on us. She didn't respond, her mind spinning with uncertainty. She needed time, space, and clarity to figure out what was best for her, for Maddie, for Jake. But one thing was clear, nothing would ever be the same again.